College was supposed to be the start of something new. For Emily, it was a dream come true. Her first semester away from her small hometown, a fresh start where nobody knew her past, her fears, or the reputation she had grown up with. Her dorm assignment placed her in the east wing of Blackwood Hall, one of the older, less maintained buildings on campus. The walls were yellowed with age, the pipes rattled at night, and the hallways smelled faintly of mildew. Emily didn't care. To her, this was independence. When she pushed open the heavy dorm door for the first time, she was greeted by dim light, a squeaky bunk bed, and a single desk shoved beneath a cracked window. The room felt claustrophobic compared to the bright images she had seen in the college brochure. And then she noticed her roommate. A girl sat on the top bunk, perfectly still, her legs crossed and her eyes wide open. She wasn't unpacking, wasn't on her phone. She was just sitting there. Emily hesitated. Hi, I'm Emily. The girl blinked slowly, then nodded. Samantha. Her voice was quiet. Too quiet, almost like she hadn't spoken in days. Emily forced a smile. Nice to meet you. Looks like we're stuck together for the year. Samantha didn't laugh, didn't even smile. She just kept staring. It was only later, when Emily crawled into bed that night, that she realized something odd. Samantha hadn't turned off the light, hadn't changed into pajamas, and hadn't even shifted her position. She just sat there, wide awake, watching. The first week of classes was a blur of syllabi, orientation events, and rushed meals at the dining hall. Emily tried to focus on fitting in, but her roommate's strange behavior was impossible to ignore. Samantha never seemed to leave the room. When Emily returned from class, she was there. When Emily woke in the middle of the night, Samantha was sitting upright, staring out the window or directly at her, and Emily had never once seen her sleep. One night, unable to take the silence anymore, Emily asked, "Hey, do you ever get tired? I mean, I've never seen you go to bed." Samantha's head tilted slightly, as though the concept confused her. "I don't need to." Emily laughed nervously. "Lucky you. I can't stay awake past midnight." But Samantha didn't laugh. Her eyes never left Emily's face. The following morning, Emily woke with her throat dry and a dull ache in her chest. Samantha was still awake, sitting in the same position as the night before. And for the first time, Emily noticed bruises forming on her own arms, round, dark marks that hadn't been there yesterday. By the second week, Emily's exhaustion had become unbearable. No matter how much she slept, she woke feeling drained, as if something had been taken from her during the night. And then came the whispers. Soft, indistinct voices filled the room after midnight. At first, she thought it was the dorm next door, or students in the hallway. But when she pressed her ear to the door, the corridor was silent. The whispers came from inside the room, from Samantha's side of the room. Emily turned over in her bed one night and found her roommate crouched in the corner, whispering rapidly into the darkness. Her hands moved like she was holding something invisible, her nails scratching across the air as if carving words into it. "Sam?" Emily whispered. Samantha froze. Then slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes gleamed in the dim light, wide and unblinking. "You shouldn't interrupt," she whispered. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her, her heart pounding. The next morning, the bruises on her arms were darker. Emily started keeping track. She bought a small spiral notebook and began recording each night what time she went to bed, what she heard, and what she saw when she woke up. The results were unsettling. Every single night, she awoke between 3:05 and 3:15 a.m., the so-called witching hour she had read about in high school ghost stories. Every single time, Samantha was either sitting upright in bed, crouched in the corner, or standing near the window, staring outside like she was waiting for someone. And every morning, Emily discovered new bruises, always in the same places: her arms, her ribs, her thighs, as though someone had pressed fingers into her flesh while she slept. By the end of the second week, she had over a dozen recorded entries. And something else. She noticed that her dreams were changing. At first, they were vague, a sense of falling, whispers she couldn't understand. But then they sharpened. Now, she dreamt of hands pressing her down, of cold breath against her ear, of eyes gleaming in the dark. Sometimes she woke up gasping for air, convinced someone had been sitting on her chest. When she told her RA, the girl laughed it off. Blackwood Hall's ancient, creaks, bad pipes, mold. It messes with you. Don't stress. Midterms are coming. Everyone's losing sleep. But Emily knew it wasn't just stress. It was Friday night, when Emily decided she couldn't take it anymore. She stayed late at the library, stalling, pretending she had extra research to do. At 11:45 p.m., she finally started walking back to Blackwood Hall, her stomach in knots. As she turned down the dorm hallway, she noticed an older janitor mopping near the stairwell. He looked up as she passed, his eyes narrowing. "You in 2C?" he asked abruptly. Emily blinked. "Yeah, why?" He shook his head, lips tightening. "Shouldn't be anyone in there. They never put kids in that room anymore." Emily froze. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, the stairwell door slammed open and two other students came laughing through, breaking the moment. When Emily looked back, the janitor had walked away, pushing his mop bucket quickly down the hall. Her hands shook as she unlocked the dorm door. Samantha was there, of course, sitting cross-legged on the top bunk, wide awake, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "You're late," she whispered. Emily couldn't sleep that night. She lay under her blanket, heart pounding, listening to the whispers start up again around 3 a.m. But this time, she forced herself not to look. She stayed perfectly still, gripping her notebook like a lifeline. The next morning, she went straight to the campus library archives. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Just something. After an hour of searching, she found it. A yellowed newspaper, clipping from 12 years ago. Headline: Blackwood Hall student found dead in dorm room. The article was short. A freshman named Samantha Rhodes had been discovered by her roommate, who claimed Samantha hadn't slept for days before suddenly collapsing. Cause of death: heart failure. Emily's stomach dropped. The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. The pale face, the wide eyes. Her roommate was dead. Emily couldn't breathe when she returned to the dorm. The newspaper clipping burned in her pocket, her fingers trembling as she unlocked the door. Samantha was waiting, sitting upright on the bed, just like always. "You found it," she whispered. Emily froze. "What are you talking about?" "The story, the picture, you know now." Her throat went dry. You're not real." Samantha's lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "Does this feel unreal?" Suddenly, Emily's chest tightened. The air squeezed out of her lungs, as if invisible hands were gripping her ribs. She stumbled forward, gasping, clawing at her throat. Then, just as quickly, it stopped. Samantha was still sitting there, perfectly calm. You don't get to leave, she said softly. Emily couldn't stay another night. She packed her backpack in silence, stuffing in her laptop, her notes, a handful of clothes. She didn't care if she had to sleep in the library or beg a couch off someone she barely knew. When the hallway clock struck midnight, she grabbed her bag and slipped toward the door. But the door wouldn't open. The knob turned, but something pulled it back, a force so strong it rattled the hinges. Emily yanked harder, panic flooding her chest. Behind her, Samantha's voice was low, almost soothing. Don't fight it. We belong here together. Emily spun, her back pressed to the door. Samantha was standing now, for the first time, her white nightdress dragged across the floor, her bare feet leaving faint wet prints as she moved closer. You're making me tired, Samantha whispered. Her eyes flickered black for a split second. And when I'm tired, you'll sleep forever, Emily screamed, throwing herself at the window. The glass rattled, but didn't break. The night swallowed her cries. By morning, Emily had collapsed from exhaustion on the floor, her bag still clenched in her hands. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the blinds. The door was ajar. She stumbled into the hall, nearly tripping over her own feet as she fled downstairs. She didn't stop until she found the janitor again, mopping near the main lobby. He looked up, eyes widening. You're still here. Please, she begged, grabbing his sleeve. Tell me what's happening in that room. The man's face hardened. That girl, Samantha, she's been dead for over a decade. Every few years, they forget, assign a new kid in 2C. And every time, the same thing happens. The new roommate never makes it to spring semester. Emily's stomach turned cold. So what happens to them? The janitor's voice dropped to a whisper. They don't leave. They just stop waking up. Emily couldn't eat, couldn't think. Every word from the janitor echoed in her head. They just stop waking up. That evening, she sat on her bed, bag packed again, heart pounding like a drum. Samantha sat across from her, swinging her legs slowly like a child. You're leaving, Samantha said softly. Emily's hands tightened on her straps. I have to. The ghost's smile was faint, eerie. You'll come back. They always do. Emily stood, forcing her shaking legs to move toward the door. To her shock, the knob turned freely this time. The hallway stretched ahead of her, lit by flickering yellow bulbs. She ran, down 2 flights of stairs, past the vending machines, out into the cold night air. Her lungs burned with relief. She was outside, free, or so she thought. Emily didn't stop until she reached the library. She pushed through the glass doors and collapsed at a study table, shaking. The night guard gave her a strange look, but said nothing. She stayed there until dawn, too afraid to close her eyes. But when morning came, something was wrong. Her notebook, the one she'd left zipped inside her backpack, was sitting open on the table in front of her. A fresh entry had been written inside, in handwriting that wasn't hers. Roommate awake, Emily still fighting sleep. Won't last much longer. Her stomach dropped. She slammed the notebook shut, heart hammering. The guard walked past, whistling softly, and Emily almost begged him for help. But when she looked closer, she froze. It wasn't the guard's face staring back at her. It was Samantha's. For just a second, a flicker, the guard's face had shifted, pale and wide-eyed. Before returning to normal, Emily bolted. No matter where she ran, across campus, into crowded dining halls, down busy streets, she saw her, Samantha's pale face in every reflection. her whisper in every shadow. By nightfall, Emily was staggering back toward Blackwood Hall, her body heavy, her eyes burning. The door to 2C was open. The room glowed faintly, as though waiting for her. She stepped inside. Samantha was on the top bunk, legs folded, eyes gleaming. Told you. You can't leave. Emily dropped her bag, sinking to her knees. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything, but her body no longer obeyed. The last thing she felt was Samantha's cold hand brushing her hair back as she whispered, "Now we'll never sleep alone again." The next morning, the RA found Emily's bed neatly made, her desk cleared. Her belongings were gone. But when a new freshman was assigned to room 2C the following semester, they found a spiral notebook tucked beneath the mattress. The last page read, in shaky handwriting, "Do not room with her. She never sleeps." Story 2. The Abandoned Highway Motel. The rain had been coming down for hours, turning the highway into a blur of red taillights and slick pavement. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting through the wipers as his wife, Claire, shifted uneasily in the passenger seat. Their 10-year-old son, Jacob, was asleep in the back, his head against the window. "We should pull over," Claire said softly. "You're exhausted," Mark shook his head. "We're only an hour from the next town. I can push through." But the gas light had been glowing for the last 30 miles, and the storm wasn't letting up. By the time the exit sign appeared through the downpour, a faded green board that simply read, "Lakeside Motel, 2 miles." He had no choice. They took the turnoff. The road narrowed, lined with thick woods that bent beneath the storm. At last, a flickering neon sign appeared ahead, its red letters buzzing weakly in the rain. Lakeside Motel. Vacancy. The parking lot was nearly empty. The lobby smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke. A single desk lamp cast yellow light across the counter, where an old man sat hunched over a logbook. He looked up slowly as Mark approached. His eyes were pale, cloudy, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. "Need a room?" His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "Yes," Mark said, "just for the night." The man slid a key across the counter. The tag read, "Room 6. No noise after midnight," the man muttered. "And don't go wandering," Mark frowned. "Excuse me." But the man had already bent back over his logbook, ignoring him. Claire shifted uncomfortably. "This place gives me the creeps," she whispered. Mark forced a smile. "It's just one night." They carried their bags down the damp hallway, the carpet squishing faintly underfoot. At the end, they found room 6. The door groaned as Mark pushed it open. The room smelled of stale air and mold. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls. A single bare bulb buzzed overhead. Jacob wrinkled his nose. "This place is gross," Claire sighed. "We'll survive." But as Mark set their bags down, he noticed something strange. There was a mirror on the far wall, tall, cracked, and old. And though it reflected the room perfectly, it didn't reflect them. They tried to sleep, despite the damp sheets and the constant dripping of water somewhere in the ceiling. At 12:03 a.m., Mark woke to the sound of footsteps outside the door, slow, heavy, pacing back and forth. He glanced at Claire, who was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide. "You hear that?" she whispered. Mark nodded. Climbing out of bed, he pressed his ear to the door. The footsteps stopped immediately. Heart pounding, he turned the lock, but before he could open it, Jacob's voice came trembling from the other bed. Dad, there's someone in the mirror. Mark whipped around and froze. The cracked mirror reflected the room, but now there was a fourth figure in it. A tall man, dressed in black, standing right behind them. Mark's stomach dropped as he stared at the cracked mirror. The man's reflection didn't move. It just stood there, tall, gaunt, with a face blurred like static. Claire grabbed Jacob, pulling him close. Mark, what is that? Mark forced his voice steady. It's just a trick. The glass is warped. But as he said it, the figure in the reflection smiled. Its mouth stretched far too wide. Mark spun around. The room behind him was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure had stepped closer. Now, it was right behind their reflections, its long fingers hovering over their shoulders. Jacob whimpered. Claire clutched his arm so tightly, her knuckles went white. Mark grabbed the motel phone on the nightstand and pressed 0. Static hissed through the receiver. Then a voice. The same old man from the lobby. You were warned, he said. Don't go wandering. The line went dead. They couldn't stay. Mark shoved their bags back together and yanked open the door. The hallway outside was dark. The overhead light bulbs flickered faintly, buzzing like insects. Stay close, Mark whispered, guiding Claire and Jacob down the corridor. But halfway to the lobby, Jacob tugged on his sleeve. Dad, the rooms. Mark glanced at the row of doors. Every one of them was slightly open. From inside came faint noises, whispering voices, scratching sounds, soft crying, and one by one, the doors began to creak wider. A pale hand slipped out of room 4, grasping the edge of the frame. Another door revealed a shadowed figure crouched low, its head jerking unnaturally. Claire stifled a scream. Mark, hurry! They ran, their footsteps pounding the soaked carpet. The whispers followed them, growing louder, overlapping into a chorus of unintelligible voices. When they burst into the lobby, the desk was empty. The old man's logbook lay open. On the page, for room 6, their names were already written, but the column labeled departure date was blank. Mark tried the front door. It wouldn't budge. He shoved harder, but it was as though the glass had turned to stone. Claire rattled the window frames. None of them opened. Behind the counter, a hallway stretched into shadow. Faint red light glowed at the far end, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jacob pointed. Maybe that way. Reluctantly, they crept past the counter. The hallway grew colder, the air thick with rot. The red glow came from a heavy steel door, its surface scratched with hundreds of names. Mark reached for the handle. It turned easily. The door swung open to reveal a vast, windowless room. Dozens of cracked mirrors lined the walls, and in each one stood a different figure. Men, women, children, all staring blankly out, trapped in their reflections. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! Mark turned to run, but their own reflections no longer matched them. In the glass, the family stood still, motionless, while behind them loomed the tall, grinning man in black, and slowly their reflections raised their hands and pressed them against the glass, as though begging to be let out. The room of mirrors hummed with a low vibration, as if dozens of voices whispered at once from behind the glass. Claire pulled Jacob back, shielding his eyes. Mark, trembling, stepped closer to the wall. He noticed the figures weren't strangers. They looked familiar. A woman with long dark hair pressed her palm against the glass. She was the waitress they'd passed at a roadside diner that afternoon. Another reflection showed a truck driver Mark had glimpsed at a gas station last week. Mark, Claire whispered, horrified. These are travelers. They're all the people who stopped here. Mark's throat tightened. He remembered the logbook at the front desk. The motel wasn't just keeping records. It was keeping people. And then he saw a blank mirror at the far end of the wall. Empty. Waiting. Claire followed his gaze. That's for us, isn't it? The lights flickered violently. A deep, guttural laugh rolled through the room. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the mirrors, until it felt like the glass itself might shatter. Then he appeared, the man from the reflections, tall, gaunt, dressed in a black suit that seemed too tight on his elongated frame. His face flickered between clarity and static, never fully visible. His eyes, when they landed on them, burned like coals. Claire clutched Jacob. Stay back. Mark stepped forward, fists clenched. What do you want from us? The man tilted his head. His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated through their bones. You checked in. A pause. His grin widened. No one checks out. The mirrors shuddered, and hands began pounding against the glass from the inside. All the trapped souls screaming, their mouths wide but soundless. Jacob screamed. Claire dragged him toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own, locking them in. The keeper advanced slowly, his elongated fingers dragging along the glass walls, leaving black scorch marks wherever he touched. Mark's heart pounded as he placed himself between the figure and his family. Take me, he shouted, his voice cracking. Just let them go. The keeper froze, head tilting like a puppet on broken strings. He leaned closer, his face inches from Mark's. The air smelled of burnt wood and iron. Finally, he whispered, a trade, always a trade. A mirror near the door shimmered, showing Claire and Jacob outside, running into the night. But the reflection of Mark was gone. Claire screamed, pounding on the real glass. No, Mark, don't! Mark's knees shook. He could see freedom for his wife and son, but only if he stayed behind. The keeper extended his hand, fingers impossibly long. The mirrors howled. The room shook. Claire sobbed, pressing Jacob's face into her chest. Mark, please, please don't leave us. Mark hesitated. For a moment, the reflection of his family smiled at him from the glass. Not with joy, but with a terrible, hollow emptiness. And then the keeper whispered again, soft and final. Decide. Mark's breath came ragged, his eyes locked on the keeper's hand. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on his lungs. Behind him, Claire's sobs echoed in the chamber, raw and desperate. Jacob's small voice trembled. Dad, don't. Please don't. The keeper's coal red eyes burned brighter, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. One stays, two go. His voice cracked like thunder through the mirrors. Mark thought of every late night with Claire, every laugh, every promise. He thought of Jacob's first steps, his first words. He couldn't imagine them trapped here. Slowly, Mark reached out. His hand trembled as it hovered over the keeper's claw-like fingers. Take me, he whispered. The keeper seized his wrist. Fire shot up Mark's arm. The mirrors screamed. Claire screamed his name. She threw herself against the door, pounding it with her fists. Suddenly, the mirror beside her shimmered. It no longer showed her reflection. Instead, it showed the parking lot outside, drenched in rain, their car waiting under a flickering light. Go, Mark shouted, his voice breaking. Get Jacob out. The keeper yanked him toward the empty mirror at the far end. Its surface rippled like water, pulling him closer. Claire clutched Jacob's hand, tears streaming. She shook her head violently. No, we won't leave you, the keeper hissed. The mirror behind Claire began to close, the image of the outside world fading. Mark roared, Now, Claire! In one last sobbing scream, Claire dragged Jacob into the mirror. The glass rippled, and they were gone. The mirror snapped shut. The chamber fell silent, except for Mark's screams, as the keeper pulled him into the dark glass. Claire and Jacob stumbled into the rain, collapsing onto the cracked asphalt of the motel lot. The neon sign buzzed overhead, the word vacancy glowing faintly. When Claire turned back, the building was gone. In its place stood only empty fields and the endless stretch of highway. Her breath caught in her throat. Jacob clung to her, sobbing into her chest. For hours, they walked until a trucker spotted them and pulled over. Claire begged him for help, but when he asked where they'd come from, she could only whisper, the motel. The trucker frowned. Ain't been a motel on this stretch in 50 years. Years later, travelers still tell stories of a glowing neon sign on stormy nights. A place to rest when the highway feels too long, and if you listen closely, sometimes you can hear screams carried on the wind, the sound of the lost, pounding on the mirrors, begging to get out. At the very end of the ledger, in the motel's forgotten office, beneath hundreds of names scrawled across decades, one more entry has been written in trembling ink. Room 6, Mark Holloway, departure date, never story, 3, the mirror in the basement. When Daniel received the call from his late uncle's lawyer, he assumed it would be a simple matter of paperwork. His uncle had lived alone in a small countryside house for decades, rarely visited, and left behind only a modest estate. Daniel, you are the sole heir, the lawyer said. Everything is yours. The house, the belongings. Daniel laughed lightly. Even the old basement? The lawyer paused. Yes, but take care. There are peculiar items down there. You should proceed with caution. The words struck Daniel as odd, but he shrugged them off. It wasn't as though he believed in ghosts or curses. When he arrived at the property, the house seemed untouched by time. The front porch sagged. The paint had long since peeled, and the garden had become a tangle of weeds. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and dust. He explored the rooms methodically, cataloging furniture and antiques, but his attention kept drifting toward the basement door at the end of the hallway. A faint chill seemed to seep from the cracks beneath it. He hesitated, hand on the handle. The lawyer's words echoed. Peculiar items. Proceed with caution. With a deep breath, Daniel turned the knob and descended the narrow wooden stairs. The basement was cold, darker than he expected. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly, barely illuminating the space. Boxes of old books and furniture were stacked along the walls. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of light. But at the far end of the room stood a mirror. It was massive, framed in tarnished silver, tall enough to reach the ceiling. Its surface was flawless, reflecting the dim light perfectly. Daniel stepped closer. The mirror didn't seem unusual at first, but as he gazed into it, he felt wrong. His reflection moved, but not exactly in sync. When he raised his left hand, The reflection hesitated for a fraction of a second. When he blinked, the reflection blinked slower. Must be my eyes playing tricks, he muttered. But as he reached toward it, the reflection's lips moved first. Slowly, they formed words. You shouldn't be here. Daniel stumbled back, heart hammering. The basement suddenly felt smaller, oppressive, as if the air had thickened. He tried to ignore it. It's just an old mirror, he told himself. But that night, lying in the living room, he couldn't sleep. He kept imagining shadows, stretching across the walls, whispers, echoing faintly from below. At 2:47 a.m., he awoke to the sound of faint knocking. He froze. The sound came from the basement. Hesitant, he crept to the door. The knocking stopped. A soft, almost inaudible whisper came. Daniel, come down. He shook his head, trying to convince himself it was the wind or the house settling. But curiosity and an inexplicable pull got the better of him. He descended the stairs again. The mirror loomed at the far end. His reflection stared at him, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. Then, slowly, the reflection smiled. Daniel gasped. It was not his smile. It was cruel, knowing, inhuman. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The basement was pitch black. He felt a cold breeze brush past him from the mirror itself. The next day, Daniel couldn't shake the image of that cruel smile. Determined to find answers, he scoured his uncle's papers and journals. He found a small, leather-bound notebook, yellowed with age. Inside were notes, sketches, and cryptic warnings. One page was labeled, "The Mirror. Do not look alone." According to his uncle's handwriting, the mirror had been purchased in the early 1900s from an estate sale of a now-defunct circus sideshow. It was rumored to trap a fragment of the soul of anyone who stared too long. Daniel's heart raced as he read further. Notes described people who had vanished after staring into the mirror, leaving only reflections that continued to move independently. Some were trapped for decades, their reflections staring out, silently screaming. A chill ran down his spine. That was why his reflection had smiled. It wasn't him. Something else lived inside that mirror. That evening, Daniel tried to avoid the basement, but the pull was irresistible. He needed to understand. He lit a single lamp and descended the stairs. The mirror stood like a sentinel in the dim light. His reflection greeted him, lips moving silently. He took a step closer. The reflection mimicked him, then did something he hadn't done. It reached out. A pale, cold hand pressed against the glass from the inside, as if trying to grasp his real hand. Daniel yanked back. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The lamp flickered, then died, plunging him into darkness. Whispers echoed around the basement, growing louder, words he couldn't understand. A cold breath grazed his neck. He stumbled backward, almost falling down the stairs. When he looked again, the mirror's surface rippled. His reflection was no longer mimicking him. It was moving independently, stepping forward, smiling wickedly. The following nights were worse. Objects in the house shifted inexplicably. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. Daniel often awoke to find the lamp tilted, books off the shelves, and the faint sensation of being watched. He began noticing figures in his peripheral vision, shadows that flickered, indistinct but humanoid. The whispers became voices, calling his name, beckoning him toward the basement. He tried to cover the mirror, drape it with cloth, even wedge furniture against it. Nothing worked. Each night, the cover would fall, the furniture shifted, and the whispers would start again. One night, As he slept, he woke to see his own reflection standing in the middle of the living room, smiling at him. Its eyes were black voids. Its lips moved. "You belong down there." Daniel froze. The air grew icy. Every breath he took felt stolen. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The mirror in the basement pulsed, glowing faintly in the darkness, as if alive, a heartbeat resonating through the walls. Daniel's nights became unbearable. Sleep offered no respite. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his reflection standing in the corners of his room, grinning, whispering unintelligible words. By day, he felt watched. The house creaked in unnatural patterns. Objects moved on their own. Shadows shifted too fast to be natural. He tried to leave, but the mirror's influence followed him. He could catch glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces even outside the basement. Windows, spoons, polished doorknobs. Desperate, he returned to the basement. The mirror glowed faintly, as though it had been waiting. "Please," Daniel whispered. "What do you want from me?" The reflection stepped forward, hand reaching toward the glass. Then it smiled. Not his smile, but the smile of a predator, savoring its prey. "You're already mine," it said, "and soon the house will be mine too." Daniel stumbled back. The room seemed to tilt. Whispers echoed, overlapping hundreds of voices. They were inside his head now, chanting, calling, mocking, terrified. Daniel tried to destroy the mirror. He grabbed a crowbar and swung at the surface. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it rippled like liquid, distorting his reflection. His own face appeared behind the reflection, pale and lifeless. Its eyes were hollow. Its lips moved silently, mocking him. The crowbar slipped from his hands as an invisible force pushed him toward the glass. He fell back, hitting the basement wall. When he looked again, the reflection was gone. For a brief moment, he thought he had succeeded, until he heard a whisper behind him. "Look behind you." He turned. The mirror rippled again. His reflection emerged, stepping out of the glass. Daniel ran, fumbling up the basement stairs. But every door he tried to open refused to budge. The whispering followed, growing louder, more insistent. The mirror pulsed, as though alive, drawing him back toward it. Exhausted, Daniel collapsed in the living room. That's when he noticed something terrible. A faint outline of the mirror now appeared in every reflective surface. Windows, silverware, even the dark screen of his laptop. Everywhere he looked, the reflection stared back at him. It was no longer confined to the basement. The whispers coalesced into words. "You cannot escape. You will join us." And then he realized the previous owners of the house, the journals, the warnings, the stories, all had failed because no one ever truly left the mirror. It collected fragments of souls, pulling them in, one by one, until the reflection could fully replace them in the world of the living. Daniel tried to run outside. The front door wouldn't open. Every window reflected his own terrified face, and behind it, the same hollow-eyed version of him, grinning wickedly. The house seemed to stretch and twist around him. Every corridor, every hallway led him back to the basement, as though the house itself had become a labyrinth controlled by the mirror. Daniel's panic reached a fever pitch. Every reflective surface in the house now showed his hollow-eyed reflection, grinning at him. The whispers became screams, echoing in his skull. He stumbled toward the basement stairs, hoping the source of the horror might reveal a weakness. The mirror loomed at the far end, glowing faintly. Its surface rippled like black water. As he approached, the reflection moved, not in sync with him. It stepped forward, grinning wider, and spoke in his own voice. Come to me. There is no escape. He tried to flee, but the walls bent around him, turning the stairs into a loop. Each step downward brought him back to the mirror. His own reflection laughed, a cold, empty sound that chilled him to the bone. Daniel grabbed a heavy chair and smashed it against the mirror. The glass rippled, then solidified, reflecting him perfectly for a moment. But the reflection winked. Suddenly, invisible hands pulled him forward. He struggled, screaming, but could not resist. The mirror's surface seemed to melt, wrapping around him like liquid metal. He felt icy fingers gripping his arms, his legs, pulling him in. As he was pulled closer, he saw the reflections inside the glass, dozens of faces, pale and screaming silently, trapped eternally. And at the center, a hollow-eyed version of himself grinned, beckoning him. He let out a final scream as the mirror swallowed him completely. The next morning, the house was silent. The basement appeared undisturbed. The mirror sat at the far end, as though nothing had happened. Daniel's journals, scattered across the living room, described warnings in trembling ink. Do not look too long. Do not stand too close. Once the mirror sees you, it will take you. Months later, a new owner would inherit the property. They would find a pristine antique mirror in the basement, one that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. If they stared too long, the reflection would smile, and somewhere inside, Daniel's hollow-eyed self would wave, trapped forever behind the glass.